Does your planning process leave you stuck? Here's what you're missing. If I had a dime for every time executives left a meeting, including myself, saying, you know what, that's a really good plan. We are so smart. And then realize a month later that what's going on? The front line, one, it doesn't resonate with them, or two, they didn't even know about the strategy to begin with. So there's a lack of alignment. We need to adopt a system or a structure that's agile, so it moves really quickly. It's adaptable, so it can move to fit whatever the situation is. It's simple, yet powerful. So something that comes to mind for me is it doesn't require any Six Sigma or huge certification training or any of those other things too. It needs to be something that's straightforward enough that it really minimizes our time when we're onboarding. It minimizes the complexity of managing that process, all of those kinds of things. So first, establish priorities, and then adopt that structure that is agile, adaptable, simple, yet powerful. And it's a system that aligns at all levels, so that strategic piece with the tactical. So the system has to take that into account, the structure. A system that I've moved from the crisis leadership world, whether it be wildfires, floods, so on and so forth, and moved it into my corporate is called PPOST. And it's a structure that I've used it for years, again, on the crisis leadership side, because the question comes, we have 5,000 responders, for example, for a wildfire. How do we get them all moving in the same direction? And without a stratified system or structure, it would be absolute chaos. And so it's a system called PIPOS. What is PIPOS? I'll just cover it at a high level here. The first P is priorities. So in the case of, let's say, crisis leadership, it is life and safety, it's incident stabilization, so not making the system worse, those kinds of things. So if we were to apply that in corporation, maybe it's a priority is to gain market share against a particular competitor or in a particular space. That is a priority. Awesome. Okay, good. So we figure out what our priorities are. The next step, the next P in the PPOS is what problems do we have against that priority? So in other words, to put it very simply, what threats do we have to that priority? Those are problems or issues. So we would list all of those things. So if we were to look at market share, for example, what are some problems with that? One, we have a competitor that is highly visible in the space. We have lack of a presence in a particular geography, if that's the case, or online, content marketing, any of those kinds of things. So what are the problems? And we would list all of the problems around that. So we have our priorities, then we have our problems, which are our threats to those priorities. Then we get into objectives. Simply put, those are what are we going to do about those problems. So see how that works? So we have a priority, we have a problem. Now we have to figure out what we're going to do about that. And the objective should meet that SMART criteria. I know this is acronym soup here today, but it needs to meet that SMART criteria. But there's a nuance to the SMART criteria that I apply. So there's specific, there's measurable. This one is action orientated. So it needs to be a verb. And then the R is relevant. So it needs to actually fit the situation. And then T is time sensitive. So that's the SMART criteria: specific, measurable, action-oriented, so it needs to be a verb, relevant, and time sensitive. So what are we going to do about it? It meets that SMART criteria. So priorities, problems, which are a threat to those priorities. The objective is what are we going to do about that? We can have multiple objectives for that problem. And then the S in PPOS is strategy. I understand that there are so many definitions of strategy. I totally get it. For me, simple is powerful. So what is the S, the strategy in PPOS? It's simply how are we going to do that? So we have our problems, we have our objectives, what are we going to do about it? And then our strategies, how are we going to achieve that? And then the T in PPOS is tactics. That's where we're getting into the who at that point. So see how that aligns? And in fact, you should and must connect the dots. So you have a priority down to a tactic, and if you were to draw it out on a whiteboard in a Trello or anything like that, you'd see actually a connection. You can have multiple strategies, multiple tactics, but ultimately it's like a web, or a mind map is another way of thinking about it. So that's the system that I teach and have used for over 30 years in both corporations and in crisis leadership. That's a structure that is so powerful, but more on that if you want. So I went through a bunch of those things there, so if you're curious to hear more, just comment PPOST or DM me PPOST, and hopefully you can take some of that and apply it into your own personal and professional life.